The Secrets of Doctor Who is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, episode 119.
One day, I shall come back.
That's it. I've been renewed.
It's when a Time Lord's body wears out, he regenerates.
I'm a Time Lord. I'm not a human being. I walk in eternity.
Braveheart.
Change, my dear, and it seems not a moment too soon.
Unlimited rice pudding.
Position universe. Wearing a bit thin.
Fantastic.
Allons-y!
I am Scottish. I can complain about things.
Ta-da! Ooh. Should be fine.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. Today we're discussing the 10th Doctor story, Human Nature. Joining me today on the panel are Father Corey Stika. Hi, Father Corey.
How's it going, Dom?
Good, and Jimmy Aiken.
Howdy, Dom.
So, folks, remember to like The Secrets of Doctor Who on our Facebook page. We have a Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page. And to retweet our shows on Twitter. Leave us comments. That helps us to get the word out. And that engagement is the social media algorithm. It's funny business that lets other people see the show there. And it helps us grow the audience. Also, if you have not yet done so, please subscribe to the show in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, your favorite podcast app. On YouTube, where you can hit the bell to get notifications. If you have a Google Home or Amazon Echo device, you could simply say, play Secrets of Doctor Who podcast. You have to use the start word first. I had to be careful. I didn't want to start up mine.
Yeah, and you need to use the word podcast so it knows where to look. Right.
So you say, Echo, play the Secrets of Doctor Who podcast, and it will start playing. So you could even listen there. So wherever you want to get your podcast, you can get it.
I am so looking forward to when they let us have fully customizable wake words for our AI assistants. I already know what one of mine is going to be. It's going to be Frunch, because that's a term from Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle's Mode in God's Eye series. And in one of the novels, they actually have the equivalent of an Echo device that is named Frunch. And so that's going to be one of mine.
That's good.
And for if you've never read those novels, a Frunch is a specialist from an alien race who is designed to become an expert in you. It's like their PhD is in you.
That's awesome. I want mine to be K9. So that said, before we get started, I do have a request, folks. The Secrets of Doctor Who is part of the SQPN, the Star Quest Production Network, the Star Quest Media. We are a nonprofit organization. Everyone who works on these programs, apart from me, everyone's a volunteer, and we volunteer our time, and they volunteer their money. It's the labor of love, and we're growing by leaps and bounds, which is a great thing. It's a great problem to have, but means we need more help. And we're looking.
When we say we're growing by leaps and bounds, unfortunately, at present, we don't mean economically. We mean in terms of the number of shows we're producing for you, and thus the workload. Yes. And that's why we need volunteers.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we are, like I said, small nonprofit, small in funding and small in numbers. So but we have many great shows. So we need some more help. And if you have any ability in audio editing, if you know how to post things on a website, if you know how to post things to social media, if you are interested in helping us produce shows, which is mainly organizing things behind the scene, making sure people show up when they're supposed to show up, and getting people's email addresses and Skype handles and that sort of stuff. If you have any desire or ability to do any of those things for maybe 1 or 2 hours a week at most, it would be sort of up to you how much time you want to spend on it. Please contact me and let me know. We can have a conversation. It's not a commitment, but I could let you know what's entailed and maybe you'd be interested in helping. So if you could send an email to help@sqpn.com, that would be greatly appreciated. So let's get into today's episode, which is the first part of a two-parter. This week, we're talking about the first part. Next week, we're going to be talking about the second part. But this week, we're talking about, it's called Human Nature. We're still in season 3 of the rejuvenated Doctor Who series.
So this is the Martha Jones season.
Martha Jones season. And Martha Jones is the companion. This originally, this episode aired in May of 2007. And it's the 8th episode of that 3rd season. So we're kind of getting to we're in the second half of that season.
And Martha has just at this point become like a regular companion and has gotten her TARDIS key and everything like that.
Exactly. Right. Last episode she did. Yep.
By the way, the fact this is a 2-parter means that it's interesting for comparison to a lot of classic series, which were 4-parters, but the episodes were half as long. And so this 2-parter is about the same length as a classic 4-parter in terms of runtime. And that makes it interesting to compare the different way that television was produced and that the show feels now versus how it felt back then. One of the things, even with a comparable running time, this 2-parter feels much faster paced and more intense than a classic show, which would be more relaxed.
There's definitely a lot more going on in this episode than there would have been in a classic Who serial.
It's interesting if you go back and watch TV from the 70s and the 80s, how much slower everything took. You had scenes where just like there was so much time where nothing is happening except like a long shot of something, and that just would not happen today. Yeah, you're right. It's very interesting to see that.
Another interesting point of comparison with classic Who is the way British history is dealt with in this, because every country in the world is made up of sinners. And everyone's country has shameful things in its past. And there's a question in a time travel show of how do you approach those things? One of the things that Doctor Who has done is it's kind of taken different attitudes over the course of time towards British history, being a British show. Back during the early days of Doctor Who, it didn't try to glorify things in British history that were problematic. Like recently we did an episode on the Highlanders, which is, dealing with the conflict between Scotland and England a couple hundred years ago. And since they're both part of the United Kingdom now, we know who ended up, winning that.
Right.
And so there's still a lot of Scottish viewers. And so that was kind of a tricky thing. And it was interesting in the Highlanders how it was kind of nonpartisan in its approach to this event in British history. And then also recently we did Kinda, which contains a parody of British colonialism and specifically the settling of Australia, apparently. And so it took a satirical approach that implies some criticism of it, but it did it in a sort of comedic way. Here in this episode, we're looking at the events leading immediately into World War I, and we even see flash forwards to World War I, and it's much more critical of the violence that was present in 20th century conflicts and that the 20th century became famous for, even though there's loads of violence before the 20th century. The 20th century actually, by historical standards, was quite peaceful. But we have a much more realistic and kind of cold-eyed stare at these events. And yet there's still an element of heroism and a recognition that sometimes these things have to be done. And so in this 2-parter, we have kind of it's not schizophrenic exactly, but they're kind of showing us both. You have both pacifist elements and realist elements in this, and they kind of sit next to each other a little uncomfortably, given that the modern television sensibility is to just go pacifism.
Right. And one thing I noticed is, we had talked about the show, the last season episode, Rosa, and we criticized, and I think rightly, kind of the heavy-handed nature they dealt with the racial issue. This one seemed to have a much more even nature to that, where racism was a part of this,
really
Martha
uncomfortable.
Martha was talked down to because she was darker
She's
skinned.
black.
But they also made it clear that she was less, first of all, because she was a servant. You know, for these highbrow students and professors and everything, she was a servant first. It didn't matter what her skin color was. The skin color was just kind of a second aspect to it.
Jenny was
racism
also talked down to.
Yeah, the racism was subordinate to the classicism.
Right. But I think that was a much more even-handed way of looking at the racial issues back then, because there was racism. It was a real problem.
And even the racists in this are not as one-dimensional as they were in Rosa.
Exactly.
Right. Like Joan is a much more sympathetic figure, but she holds views typical of her time, that of someone of her state and class of life. So, yeah, and doesn't excuse it, but it's certainly realistic and doesn't make her an evil person either. But it highlights that. Yeah, I like the way that they highlighted the racism. They made it a part of the problem that has to be dealt with in the plot, but it wasn't overbearing in that. So that was good. One of the things.
By the
go
way,
ahead.
One other thing to know about this two-parter is we're entering an era now where the showrunners, Russell T Davies at this time, are starting to adapt stories from other Doctor Who media. So we saw an example of that in the first season with the episode Dalek. And this is another example of that. Human Nature is based on a novel that came out during the period when the show was canceled.
1995.
The novel is also called Human Nature. And it was, I believe, a Seventh Doctor novel where he becomes a human. And, in there, not to hide from aliens, but to experience what it's like to be a human. And so it's loosely based on that. But and this was the first time a novel had been adapted into a TV show.
He's Dr. John Smith, a short middle-aged history teacher from Aberdeen, who's teaching at Halton School in Faringham, a school dedicated to producing military officers, which is a criticism I had of this episode, which is they did not make that clear that this was a military school.
Right.
Yeah.
They implied it, or they implied it, first of all, I mean, with the imagery of the students marching with the practice with the weapons and everything. And then the headmaster called them cadets, which is always a military term.
Right. So it became, it was, once they were shooting live ammunition with guns, I mean, it became clear that there was not just a regular school. This is not something that happens at British boarding schools as a matter of course.
Well, that confused me. I didn't know that. And so I thought, was this normal for the period that you had military training as part of your boarding school education?
Right. Yes,
cool.
They should have. They should have explained that right off the bat. But back to that book, there it did feature Joan Redfern was in that, and some others in the Encounters Aliens and that sort of thing. So, and it is written by the same writer, Paul Cornell, who wrote this, also wrote that as well. But it's basically, what if the Doctor forgot who he was and thought he was a regular human being? That's really the premise that we're dealing with. Sort of the thought experiment. What would the Doctor be like?
And hence the title, Human Nature. This is the Doctor exploring what it is to be human. Also, now, because of the shift to this being about running away from aliens, we get a really dramatic open in this, where Martha and the Doctor are fleeing into the TARDIS. We don't know what they're running from, but the Doctor is really, really, really scared. And that's a great opening.
It is. And it introduces something called the Chameleon Arch, which has the ability to change Time Lord DNA and in every cell and make him into a human, including having one heart. So that sounds painful. We will see.
Well, it looked very painful.
Yes, and we will see it again in upcoming episode. I think it's the next episode after Family of Blood. Or no, the Blink.
No, it's
Utopia.
Down the line.
Yeah, down the line. It's a couple episodes called Utopia, where the Master has used it to hide himself among humans and has forgotten who he is.
Now, it'd be interesting if this Chameleon Arch is an offshoot of regeneration technology.
You would think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely plays with those themes in this episode.
And he has the name John Smith, which has a long history within Doctor Who. We've touched on it before.
The third Doctor was known for calling himself John Smith.
Right.
Also, it was the third Doctor with whom the two hearts concept was introduced. For the first and second Doctor, it's implied that they only have one heart. And so there have even been fan theories about, do Time Lords only grow a second heart at some point in their regeneration.
One of the things he's concerned with, and he runs into the TARDIS at the very beginning, is he makes sure their faces were not seen by the aliens, but they're being chased across time and space by these aliens. So that we don't know why are they chasing them. And then he says that the pursuers, they're about to die, so they just have to wait them out. And so why are they about to die? We don't know any of this. This is all unclear at the beginning.
And it's also the Doctor specifically they're tracking, as even though they haven't seen his face or Martha's face, they can detect his Time Lord DNA, I guess, across space and time and smell him. And that's why he needs to change his DNA so he won't be a Time Lord anymore.
Because apparently he's the only one.
Right. Except you are not alone.
Except at some point in time there were you'll find them, but what time you want me? The Doctor puts his consciousness and apparently a version of the Chameleon Arch into the watch.
Yeah,
can switch him back.
This was a little weak. I mean, he needs the headpiece Chameleon Arch to become human, but then he doesn't need it. He just needs the watch to revert to Time Lord.
And so as he explains the importance of the watch and the fact that there's a perception filter on it to prevent him as human without his memories from seeing it, he wakes from bed. Now, one thing I didn't get was
he wakes up in 1913.
In 1930, yes, I'm sorry, in bed in 1930. I get why he has to change his DNA to prevent them from seeing him, but why does he have to lose his memory?
Yeah, because reasons.
Because story.
Yeah.
Okay. They had a concept they wanted to go with, and they had to fudge into whatever that is. Okay.
Needed to make a little more fudge.
Yeah. So
exactly.
Professor Smith, Dr. Smith, whatever they're calling him, the school teacher, wakes in his room at the Farringham School, and Martha enters. She's a maid. She calls him Mr. Smith, I guess. They have the paper. It's Monday, November 10th, 1913. And
he's got a different accent.
Does he really?
Yeah, his accent. He speaks differently as human John Smith than he does as 10th Doctor.
Is it a Scottish accent?
No, it's not a Scottish accent. It's not David Tennant's natural accent, but it's a different English accent.
English. Yeah, I think, my ear is not good enough with English accents to detect specifically what it is, but I believe it implies a different class.
Right.
And then they pointed out, once he gets his Time Lord memories back, Joan points out, I believe, that he's not talking the same anymore.
Well, and his personality too changes. Like, there's still similarities in the personality, but it definitely changes.
He's much more timid and
rougher edge and crueler.
Yes, he is. So as on the accent, calling on our friend Bennett, our listener Bennett, please let us know what his new accent is. That would be very helpful.
And its significance.
Yes. The choir of boys we hear singing a song after the opening, a hymn called "To Be a Pilgrim." I don't know if there's a significance to that.
It is common, and they refer to this in Clara Oswald's time. It's apparently common even today, and certainly would have been back then, to have the opening of the school day with a brief worship service. Kind of like here in America, until the 1960s, it was common to have a Bible reading and the Lord's Prayer at the beginning of the school day, even in public schools. So
we encounter some of the boys, the older boys in the school, including Jeremy Baines, who will become Son of Mine in the Family of Blood. He's played by the actor Harry Lloyd, and if he looks familiar to you, he played Viserys Targaryen in the first season of Game of Thrones. He died gruesomely, as almost everyone does in Game of Thrones. But if you're watching the Showtime sci-fi series Counterpart, he is Peter Quayle, which is interesting. He's very good in that.
I thought he was very good in this. He initially comes across as an unsympathetic upper class snob
twit,
which is what he's supposed to be. So he did a good job of that.
He's not a twit. He's a snob. A twit would imply that he's an idiot, and he's not an idiot. But he then becomes briefly sympathetic as he's about to be possessed by a member of the Family of Blood, and then he's just downright creepy after that.
Yeah. That's one thing I really like about it is they really did the camera angles on the Family of Blood to make them just look otherworldly,
especially the little girl. which when little children become possessed in movies or TV shows, that's creepy to the extreme, and that little girl did a good job.
They played it up. They played it up well. That's one thing they did very well on this episode.
I think in The Family of Blood, he is the most effective. And then the woman, the former maid Jenny, and then the little girl who's hampered because she's so young as an actress. She's hampered. She is very creepy, but she has limited acting ability. And the farmer guy was the rich farmer was the least effective of them to me.
Right. He got the least screen time probably for a reason. One last bit on Harry Lloyd, the actor. He is the great, great, great grandson of Charles Dickens. Little bit of
interesting.
Yeah. So we have Nurse Joan Redfern, matron, who is played by the actress Jessica Hines, who we will see again. She will be Joan's granddaughter, Verity Newman, in the Regeneration episode, The End of Times, which we've already talked about here on Secrets of Doctor Who. There's a funny moment. So the doctor, well, so in the show, they make a distinction in the credits. They refer to him as John Smith for the entire time in these two episodes where he is not the doctor. So he is John Smith throughout. So I will call him both John Smith and the doctor at times. But you have to kind of keep track of most of this time he is not the doctor. I will let you know when he comes to the doctor again. So John Smith and Joan have this budding romance. There's a flirtatiousness at the beginning. And in fact, she mentioned something about going to a dance with him in the town, the dance, which apparently the town has one dance all year long.
Well, that's, I don't know that it's implied it's all year long, but there are these village feasts where they will have events like this periodically in small towns in Britain, or at least they did. And they would do English country dancing and social dancing and stuff like that at them. And so it wouldn't be like in a big city in America where you have multiple dance opportunities every night of the week. It would be like, okay, we got an orchestra coming. They're going to play on this night, and that's our dance this quarter or something like that.
This is kind of something you still see, well, out here in rural areas of America where we don't have the access to the clubs and the dance halls and things like that. So you do have big events once in a while where, of course, now it's not an orchestra. It's usually a DJ or something like that, or a live band, like a 4-piece, 5-piece live band. But it's more things like that where they're not common. You don't have every weekend. You don't have a dance. You don't have a DJ setting up or a band setting up. So I kind of understand it. Now, one thing I'm curious about is the date of the dance is November 11th, which of course we know as, Remembrance Day or the Veterans Day. Armistice Day. I wonder if in Britain at the time that was an important day, or if this is more, they're just saying this is, more foreshadowing what comes after. And it just happened to be the day that the band was available to go to this little village.
Right. Armistice Day, of course, is the day that the guns went silent of World War I in November 11th, 1918?
1918 at 11:11 in the morning.
Right. I almost said 1917. 1918. And so this predates that. This is 1913.
This was a year before. Well, it's 8 months before the war started.
Right. And so it's probably meant to be, like Jimmy said, a bit of foreshadowing.
And we will see an Armistice Day celebration or commemoration at the end of part 2. So it comes full circle in that respect. So
Nurse Joan talks about the annual dance, and John gets flustered and starts backing up and tumbles down the stairs.
Yeah, one of the things they do now, he's a history teacher, apparently, because he's giving a lecture on the Battle of Waterloo at one point to some students. But they made him an absent-minded professor, in effect. And I wonder, is that meant to be an unintended side effect of all the hacking at his memory that the Chameleon Arch did? Because the Chameleon Arch was meant to deprive him of a lot of memory, and it's like, maybe you took a little too much.
Well, and that they kind of imply that, because she asked, well, do you know how to dance? Before we go in, do you know how to dance? He's like, I'm not sure, because so he doesn't even remember that he can dance or not.
And actually he should, because he's clearly educated. And at the time, if you had a good school education, upper class, middle, high, upper middle and upper class education, you would have learned to dance in school.
So the next scene we have Joan is, as the nurse, is tending to the cut on the doctor's head, and Martha comes barreling in and gets scolded for entering without knocking, and then asks, have you checked for a concussion? Because remember, Martha is a doctor in training. She's a doctor. She knows much more than Joan does, but of course Joan is, no, I'm the nurse here, and I know, I dare say I know much more about this than you do.
And you're just a lower class servant. What do you know?
Yeah. By the way, we might want to say a word about why they're here while they're hiding. The doctor has a line in the flashbacks to how this all started about the TARDIS will find us a place where we can fit in and will give me the knowledge that I need to fit into the time period and will help and give me enough residual awareness to get you settled as well. But don't wander off.
Right. In fact, he gives her a bunch of rules to help her.
Or something like that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, which we'll get to. Yeah.
And so a bunch of those rules. So Martha flash forwards through the rules. And so they show us the video all sped up of him reading the rules to her. And David Tennant had to ad lib a bunch of those. And so one of them later comes back in Peter Capaldi's time. One of the rules he gives Martha is to never eat pears.
That's right.
And that becomes one of the last things on Peter Capaldi's mind as he's regenerating.
So
right.
I wonder if that original video is available somewhere. That'd be funny to watch.
Yes, it is.
Nice.
Apparently they cut out the never eat pears bit because they're afraid it would tell children not, encourage them not to eat their fruit or something like that. As
well, and then I think I saw on the TARDIS wiki that he actually eats a pear. In the episode.
On. Yeah. Okay. That's funny. Meanwhile, Martha sticks around to tidy the room and to check on him while Joan is taking care of him. And John tells Joan about these amazing dreams he's having. Apparently, the TARDIS overwriting of his memory is not quite holding. And so he's having dreams and remembering his life as the Doctor. And he's writing them down in his Journal of Impossible Things, as Joan calls it. And which includes stories from his dreams and of his real life and sketches.
Picture of Rose,
Rose, and also
regenerations, previous regenerations.
The first, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and the eighth Doctors.
Now, Jimmy, I can't remember. I was going to ask: is this the first time they've shown the regeneration?
Well, it's not the first time they've
in New Who.
I believe it's the first. Yeah, in New Who, it's the first time we've seen the previous regenerations. We've known about them. But this was confirmation that the classic series is part of this timeline. And specifically, it's the first confirmation that Paul McGann's Eighth Doctor, who appeared only in the 1996 movie, that's part of this timeline, too.
Yeah, because he shows right in the middle. He's right in the center there.
It made the Eighth Doctor canon as much as Doctor Who has a canon. We see the Mox of Balhoun, Autons labeled as Plastic Men, one of the Pompadour Clockwork robots, Rose, a Dalek, Cybermen, and the TARDIS, which he has labeled the Magic Box.
Yeah, and it's interesting they would label the Autons as Plastic Men. That's kind of interesting linguistically because at the time, the word plastic had a different meaning.
Right.
Malleable.
It meant malleable or moldable. So like clay, modeling clay would have been a plastic substance. But it didn't mean the synthetic polymer plastic that it later came to be attached to. And so the idea of the Autons is living plastic. You could say that, but it would mean something slightly different to a 1913 mind.
Right. See, they would almost think more of like a shapeshifter would be a plastic person.
Like, in fact, the hero, Plastic Man.
Right. Stretch Armstrong. And so, which I had as a kid. So,
anyway.
yes, Martha and Joan have a moment after they leave the doctor's office, and Martha basically tells her that she arrived at the school with John Smith, and that because she used to work for the family, and she says he just sort of inherited me. And Joan warns her that you sometimes seem a little familiar with him. Best remember your position, she says.
Which would also explain why she's sometimes a little overly familiar, because she has a long association with the family. And people in America, and I don't know, maybe elsewhere, might wonder when she says he sort of inherited me. does that have implications of slavery? And the answer is no. You couldn't. England had abolished slavery quite a while before this. That's not what's meant. It was actually common when you had longstanding servants and you had family members move and one generation transitioning to another in a rich family, that they would, quote unquote, inherit servants from other people in the family. So that's what she's referring to. Yeah.
So we switch to the dormitory where we have Hutchinson, who is pretty much a jerk like Baines is. The upperclassmen in this are pretty much all jerks. And we have young Latimer, Tim Latimer, played by Thomas Langster, who was also on Game of Thrones, by the way. I just mentioned that. Another British actor.
Hasn't everyone been on Game of Thrones now? That's the impression I get. I mean, I've never seen the show, but I'm always hearing about, oh, and this person's on Game of Thrones.
It's British. Game of Thrones for British actors is like Doctor Who for British actors. They all show up there eventually. So yes.
And I gather it has a high body count, so there are a lot of openings.
They always need new people.
Yes, a lot of open roles. So Tim, who is an underclassman who is apparently made to do all the dirty work for Hutchinson, and Hutchinson throws his notebook at Latimer and says, "Blasted Catullus, I want it done by morning." Catullus being a Roman author.
Yeah, and this is something that is a kind of a trope in British fiction about boarding schools, that there would be these put upon younger guys who would be forced by the school bullies to do stuff for them, to do their homework and, get things for them and stuff like that.
Well, and you see that in Back to the Future series. You see that as well.
Yeah. American boarding schools too.
And Tim Latimer also has one other interesting characteristic. He preternaturally knows stuff he shouldn't know.
He apparently has a latent ability to read minds, I guess,
and glimpse the future and things like that. And in the latter part of the second episode, they explain that he's basically a mutant that has a partially active telepathic pathway in his brain or something.
So Baines is sent to go get some illegally obtained alcohol for the boys to drink.
Beer.
Yes, some beer. Yep. And then Martha, meanwhile, is with Jenny, the other maid. They're out at the local pub in town, and she tells Jenny she'll only be there for another month.
Right, because they're in hiding for 3 months, and once 3 months have gone by, now this doesn't quite work with time travelers, but
yeah.
The idea is that if they wait another month, it'll be okay. They can leave.
I mean, they're presuming that the family of blood that's tracking them down is in their time already and still hunting them and not gone off to another time.
By the way, there's an earlier scene with Martha and Jenny where they're like scrubbing a floor. And this is, I think, the most racist scene. It's not the only racist thing in this, but it's the most racist thing.
Hutchinson says something. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the upper class schoolboys, as they're scrubbing the floor, one of them asks Martha, how, with hands like those, how can you tell if something's clean? And it's like, man, I want to punch this guy.
Exactly.
Oh, just like slap this man's face. But
smug little
jerk.
Yeah. I agree with you. It's designed. I mean, because Martha is a companion now. You feel defensive for her. I mean, companion or not, that no one should be treated like that, obviously. So, but
it really, I really felt it fit the characters because, of course, these are pampered, entitled, upper class kids, and they feel like they can just spit on whoever they want. So it fit the characters well.
It's not it's not atypical for the time, and that's part of the horror of this, is that actually that comment could easily, plausibly have been made at this time, and
absolutely
that's very disturbing.
Right. So they see a green flash in the sky, a streak across the sky. John Smith, who happens by at the time, just dismisses it as a meteorite and says, "Oh, it's much further away than it looks in the sky." But Martha, she knows it's something, and so she runs off to. Jenny tells her, "Oh, that looks like it landed in Cooper's Field." So she runs off to Cooper's Field, where Baines is finding the purloined, the illegally obtained beer, and he sees the ship land, but it's invisible. We have this classic invisible ship scene where he walks over.
Apparently, Wonder Woman owns it.
Exactly. Or it's a Klingon bird of prey, maybe. Baines wanders into the ship because, he's apparently an idiot, and he is a twit. And he gets possessed by the son in the family of blood and comes back to the dorm and is very sniffly. the sniffly gets to me.
Meaning he sniffs to detect things.
Yes, as a hunter, he's like a bloodhound of some sort. So Martha goes to visit the TARDIS, which is shut down and dormant
in a cabin, so it's not in plain sight.
Yes, indoors. She has a flashback to the beginning where the Doctor hatched his plan. We find out that they're being hunted by the family of blood, which can smell him. So he's rewriting his body to become human.
And there's interesting music. I have in my notes during this scene where she's having this flashback to this very dramatic thing with the Doctor. The music is fascinating in this scene. It's lighter and almost charming. It's kind of nostalgic.
Well, at first it's very pastoral and peaceful and, upbeat. And then it kind of changes. It gets a darker tone as the flashbacks go on. I noticed that as well. That was a really interesting choice on their part.
Interesting.
It's subtle. It's complex.
So we get his list of his instructions that he left behind. So he says, don't let me hurt anyone. Humans. Basically, humans
Message
are
received.
Prone to hurt some people. 2, don't worry about the TARDIS. It'll be on emergency power. 3, no getting involved in historical events. He actually says 4, no 3, which I want to believe is the Monty Python reference.
Oh, yeah.
He says, don't let me abandon you. That's number 4. Then she skips ahead to number 23, which is, if they find you, open the watch to restore me. And she's like, but what about if I see a green flash in the sky and a meteorite?
Yeah, exactly.
What if you're falling in love?
Well, that comes later, of course.
That's later.
But yes, that's another one that the Doctor could not have imagined that being something that he'd have to worry about.
We also learn who's chasing them, or something about who's chasing them. It's someone called the Family.
Yes.
And not the Charles Manson one.
Right, although they'd be the family
Although
blood.
they're pretty similar. No,
fortunately, the Manson family didn't have time travel.
Yes, thank God. So we shift to the Doctor John Smith. I was doing it again. John Smith and Latimer in the Doctor's study, or the John Smith study. Just bear with me, folks.
Latimer steals this professor's watch.
Yes.
What is up with that?
The whole plot of the rest of this episode and the next one depends on Latimer stealing the watch for no good reason. Like, why does he take it?
Well,
why
he hears the whispers from the watch because he's got that, psychic aptitude, and he hears the whispers of the watch, and so he picks it up and plays with it and pockets it.
And then pockets it. That's the whole plot depends on this little turn, and I don't know. It's
the watch becomes the MacGuffin that drives most of the rest of the plot.
Right. If the watch were in its place, the Doctor would have been restored.
This would have been a one-parter.
Yes.
And I hate to say that's where this feels like a classic Who, because you can think of Genesis of the Daleks, where they had half of an episode searching for the time ring that got misplaced, and
right,
that could have been completely cut out, but they needed to extend the episode, and that's kind of what this point feels like here with the watch.
So there's an interesting interchange between John Smith and Latimer, where he tells Latimer, your marks aren't quite good enough, and Latimer says, I'm in the top 10 of my class, and he says, yeah, but you could even be doing better. You're hiding it. You what does he say? No man should hide himself, which of course is
he's doing right now,
which is what the Doctor is doing. So Latimer pockets the watch and first he opens it and hears it calling to him, and perceives the Doctor's real self, which when the watch is open and we see the Artron energy coming from it, we then see Baines, now the son of the family of blood, sensing when the watch is open, and then Tim pockets it. Yes. So we have this voiceover. We hear Mother, it says, coming from the watch, Time Lord, hide yourself. And then we hear the Doctor's voice. The secret lies within. I'm trapped. I'm kept inside the cogs. In the dark, waiting, always waiting. Power of a Time Lord. So it goes quick, and it's a little hard to perceive. And then later on, just after the scene, he opens it up again, and it says, you are not alone. Keep me hidden. And then, and infinite fire, burn with light, burn in time. That's multiple voices say that. So it's interesting. The watch calling to him.
Later, the watch tells him, and this stretches out the plot more. The watch tells him it is not yet time while the family is at large. You got to keep me hidden and stuff like that.
Right. So the Family of Blood needs to build an army, so they apparently animate scarecrows.
Yeah, and they waffle on that later, because later they're talking about we 3D printed these scarecrows, but that's not how they set it up. It looks like they're just animating them.
Okay, right, because I'm thinking, why are there so many scarecrows in this one town? It's like they've animated every scarecrow in England to be part of their army.
And they all look exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yes.
They are very creepy, though. The scarecrows are very effectively creepy. And incidentally, this is not the first time the Doctor has dealt with scarecrows in the context of regeneration. This is something a lot of people don't know. But so at the end of Patrick Troughton's time as the Doctor, we have the 10-part War Games. The Time Lords grab him. They start to regenerate him, or we think they start to regenerate him. But there was they had a Doctor Who comic going on at the time. It was like a couple of page comic that would appear weekly in a newspaper or magazine, I forget. And since it was several months before John Pertwee's Doctor came along, they just kept doing Patrick Troughton comic strips during that few month period. And so the Doctor was let go by the Time Lords and used by them as a kind of secret agent for a few months before, in a strip called The Nightwalkers, they sent scarecrows to get him and regenerate him into John Pertwee. And so here we have this Doctor regeneration themed, because, as a human, themed two-parter with creepy scarecrows showing up to get him.
I was going to say, well, then in, Tom Baker just recently released a novel, Scratchman, and in the first third of it, scarecrows play a part as well, where these scarecrows can turn people into other scarecrows.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh,
and scarecrows are an effective horror symbol and that have been used elsewhere because they lie in the uncanny valley. They are close to the human form, which is the point. They're meant to scare birds by thinking there's a human in a field. But they are not fully human. So that makes them, if you make them a little more human, so they start walking around and doing stuff, that makes them scary, not just to birds, but to humans as well.
So, and then we see a couple scenes where Clark, the who will be the father of the Family of Blood, and then the little girl are abducted by the scarecrows, and off screen they'll be possessed by the Family of Blood.
I like how the little girl constantly has the red balloon.
Yes.
Just no matter what, she's got that red balloon with her. That's part of why she's creepy.
I don't know if it reminds me of It, which is would have been, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The red balloon thing, because that Stephen King's It predates this episode. So we have the shooting range. We talked about that before, where the schoolboys are firing automatic weapons, which is an interesting idea.
Sounds like fun.
Here we have another really uncomfortable period thing where one of the I guess it's the headmaster.
Yes, the headmaster
tells the boys those targets that they're shooting at on the range are tribesmen from the Dark Continent.
Right.
And at that point, Latimer objects and says they only have spears. And it's like this bringing a spear to a machine gun fight is like, ugh.
Yeah. Well, then the headmaster says, yeah, Latimer takes it upon himself to make us realize how wrong we all are. I hope, Latimer, that one day you may have a just and proper war in which to prove yourself. Like, man, like how very different. Like before World War I, people viewed war and the value of war. There was no glory in war then or now, but people perceived there to be. But then Latimer sees a vision of himself, of his own death on a battlefield.
And without context, it looks like he and this other schoolboy are about to die when a bomb is dropped on them.
So the watch is amplifying his natural ability, perhaps?
Something's going on, yeah.
Yeah, and then because he's not paying attention, Hutchinson asks for permission to give Latimer a beating, which the Doctor, as John Smith, permission granted.
Yeah, which is, of course, really uncomfortable for us as fans of the Doctor. But I was wondering, I mean, this is, I'm aware of some fiction about British boarding schools, but the idea of an upperclassman getting permission to beat a lowerclassman that was out of my experience. It's like, did that kind of thing happen?
Well, I could imagine if this is a military school, that discipline from upperclassmen to lowerclassmen would have been a part of their training. because, of course, again, they're training to be officers. So discipline is a part of that. But
even as officers, you wouldn't say, can I beat this private here? It would be like, can I perform corporal punishment or something like that?
Right.
Yeah. Do you know this episode, that like the school in both parts of this story reminded me a lot of the 1981 movie Taps. Do you remember that one? Timothy Hutton, a young Tom Cruise, George C. Scott. It was about a military school, kids of these ages, from grade school to high school, that was being shut down, and then they rebelled, and the army surrounded it. There's it felt like a lot of similar elements were in that as well. Some of these bits and pieces. I got a real feel of that in this as I was watching it. So Nurse Redfern comes out. She sees John Smith participating in this shooting, and she's unhappy. She's clearly unhappy with him. And he says, there's something wrong. I was just thinking about the day my husband was shot, which is, ouch, a little bit.
We later learn he was killed in a battle, and I think it was the Boer War.
Yes. Yep. And in fact, he died in the Battle of Spion Kop, which was during the Boer War in South Africa in 1900. I looked that up. And it's actually part of, it's become part of British slang. The Kop is what they call a particular part of a soccer pitch where the people stand because it's elevated. And that was the basis of the battle.
Soccer or cricket?
Football. Soccer. Okay. Football pitch. I'm American, so I said soccer. So we have this scene of the doctor or John Smith and Joan walking through the village as she tells him about her husband and how he died.
And here he redeems himself because, she was originally attracted to him. Then she gets really turned off by the shooting. Now he redeems himself because he saves a woman and a baby from having a piano fall on them and thus saving their lives. And he does it in this Rube Goldberg way. He grabs a cricket ball from a little boy and ricochets it off stuff using his fully human but still Time Lord complexity endowed brain
and reflexes
and reflexes to save the woman and her baby. And that, now that Joan has seen him save lives, she starts to appreciate him again and refers to him like in his journal of impossible things, doing impossible things with cricket balls, which is a nice reference to the Fifth Doctor and his time floating out of a spaceship and using a cricket ball to propel himself back to safety.
Right. Well, he's wearing a cricket outfit too.
Yep.
He says the men don't need war to prove themselves, that everyday life can provide honor and valor in ordinary deeds, which is, kind of what we're seeing here with that the doctor living an ordinary life in which he doesn't, has valor in an ordinary deed of helping someone. It's not so ordinary the way he pulls it off, but you get the sense of it. And she says, I find myself at a school watching boys learn how to kill. And John Smith objects, don't you think discipline is good for boys? And she says, well, does it have to be military discipline? If there's another war, which we, as the audience, we know there will be, these boys won't find it so amusing. And, Great Britain is at peace. Long may it rain. And then she says, well, in your journal, you said there will be a war next year. So we have this revelation that's coming. So it's very interesting.
Also, her acknowledgement that you need military discipline in case of a war is like, well, okay, si vis pacem para bellum. If you want to see peace, get ready for war.
Right. So the doctor and her, then we see them outside the village walking along a field, and they see a scarecrow, and the doctor stops to fix it. Because, of course, now we're waiting for the scarecrow to come alive and start, throttling him or something. But
and it was interesting in this scene, though, he mentions the name of his parents.
Well, I was going to get to that.
Sidney and Verity.
She asks him where he's from, and he says Gallifrey. And is that in Ireland? It must be.
What you should ask.
Yeah, it must be. And then he says, My father, Sidney, was a watchmaker from Nottingham, and my mother, Verity, was a nurse. And that's a reference to Sidney Newman and Verity Lambert.
Yeah, Sidney Newman being the producer who created the Doctor Who show, and Verity Lambert being the first showrunner.
Yes,
exactly.
So a nice homage to both Sidney and Verity.
And then he plants one on Joan.
Yes, he does.
This is one of the, not the first, but one of the first romantic kisses the Doctor has ever.
That's a good point. Yes. And scandalous. And then let's see, she says he calls her beautiful and then the Doctor, and then she says widows aren't supposed to be beautiful. I think the world would rather we stopped. Is that fair that we stop? And that's an odd line, I thought. It's an odd sentiment. Stop being beautiful. Stop reminding people of death and sadness. Like, what is it they're supposed to stop doing? Like, what is it she's saying the world is saying to widows? What do you think?
Well, as a widower, I think she meant sort of stop existing, stop being present to others romantically, just kind of retire. And because it's when people learn that you're a widow or a widower, they don't know what to do. They want to say, even if it's been 20 years, I'm so sorry, and that's the best people know how to do. It makes people uncomfortable.
Well, it's especially at a young age, because then people have to recognize the idea that death can come even at a young age. People want to think of a widow or a widower as, the old spinster who lived with her husband for 50 years and he died, at the age of 90, and she's in her 90s. That's what people want to think of a widow as, not someone who's in their 20s, 30s, 40s.
We have Latimer now with the watch again, and we have another bit of where he opens it and hears the voices. They say, darkness is coming, keep me away from the false and empty man, the last of the Time Lords, the last of that wise and ancient race, merge with the faces of men. So all very cryptic. And we have Jenny taken by the scarecrows. It's a family of blood, we're told, and they put together a human family of possessed bodies, a father, a son, a daughter, a mother.
And I like how they all turn their heads in unison and then sniff.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Very creepy.
But it's another one of those things in Doctor Who and a lot of science fiction, I guess, where we have these poor people. Baines, the little girl, Jenny, Clark, they've been killed. They're dead now. We find that out that they're long gone. And there's no sympathy for them, really. I mean, there's a moment where Martha worries about what's happened to Jenny. Oh, she's gone. But we're now like, these are the enemy, and it's like with zombie movies. It's how uneven it is.
Yeah, I think you have to do that though in that situation. Mm-hmm. These people are an imminent threat, and once you realize, you'll have time to mourn for your friend later, but right now that person is trying to kill you.
Right, I get that. But just there are in Doctor, there are times when the Doctor cares about every single human being, and if one dies, he is vengeance, embodied. And then at other times he just, he moves on. And it's uneven, I think. It bothers me a little that that's how they do it. He should be consistent in that. But, I guess people aren't consistent anyway in real life.
Interestingly, the family of blood seems to be from a matriarchal culture, because mother of mine, and by the way, I like the way they refer to each other. They don't use names. It's like brother of mine, daughter of mine, sister of mine. Those are nice. It has an alien feel to it while still being recognizable. But mother of mine seems to be the head of the family. And oddly, though, she's the last one to take a human form. And she then uses it to start talking to Martha because she knows she's got some connection to what's going on. and Martha almost blunders into telling her what's going on. But she starts to realize that Jenny may not be Jenny. And she quickly, I love how smart this is of Martha. She quickly confirms, because they're having tea, and she quickly confirms that this is not really Jenny and not even a human, but one of the people they're running from, by making these ridiculous food suggestions of what they could eat that no one would. And Jenny, not knowing what these foods are, just plays along. Oh, that would be great.
Would you like some gravy in your tea? How about some mutton or sardines and jam? Yes. And then so she goes running to get the Doctor. She knows that they've been found. She's going to go get the Doctor, get the watch, and release him from whatever. So she bursts in, babbling about the watch. The Doctor makes a condescending racist remark to her. What is it? I'm trying to find it here. Oh, cultural differences. It must be so confusing for you, Martha. This is what we call a story, referring to his journal imaginings.
Yep.
And then she's like, oh, you complete.
Is that racist, though, or just classist?
That could have been is easily been classist. You could see him saying it to someone who's,
she's uneducated.
She's lower class. Yeah, she's lower class. She's not been educated like he has.
I took cultural differences to maybe mean race, but maybe in context it means class.
It could be both. I mean, that's the thing is it could be both there because there's also cultural difference in classes, especially at this time.
It is pretty condescending though, and it makes you want to give him a good smack.
Well, and she does then slap him.
Yes.
So in the same scene. So
yes, she makes you want to slap him, and she does. She's trying to snap him out of it, but so he fires her. She throws her out, and she goes running to the TARDIS. But on the way, she bumps into Tim, who has a vision of her in her 2007 clothes, running in a London alley in 2007. And is this something that has happened already or will happen? That was a little unclear.
I took it as a kind of jumbled insight into her true nature.
Okay.
Right. Because it shows Tim as a kid in 1913 in 2007 in that alley, and she bumps into him there.
So we have now the village hall where the dance is taking place. Martha shows up.
By the way, as a dance caller who was calling an English country dance just last night,
yes.
And in fact calling a waltz, that waltz music is way too fast for the moves they're doing with their feet.
Oh, yes.
There's a mismatch in the soundtrack and the actual dance moves. And it just, if you're a pro in this field, it just leaps out at you.
Even I could tell it was too fast for the way they were moving. So the Family of Blood is rifling through the Doctor's study looking for something to find him. And Martha comes running in and confronts Joan about what she must really know about the Doctor. Like, you know something is off. And then she triggers the Doctor's memory by showing him the Sonic. Like, here, you know this.
Name it.
Right. And that's when the Family of Blood shows up, and Son of Mine disintegrates the poor old veteran who is begging at the front door, and then come in and threaten Martha and Joan, trying to force him to change back into the Time Lord, because that's what they need him as the Doctor for some reason.
And they've deduced that they've overheard that he's the Doctor because Martha has been babbling about it in public. And so it's like, okay, here's your romantic interest Doctor, here's your companion Doctor. We're going to kill one or the other if you don't help us.
Right. And it was kind of interesting how they put it, like, which one of them do you want us to kill? Maid or matron, friend or lover, your choice. And it's a very interesting counterpoint there, maid or matron, and all that.
We also, in this episode, have a kind of a tie-in to the ongoing Martha soap opera when she realizes he's fallen in love for Joan Redfern, and it's like, you had to go and fall in love with a human, and it wasn't me.
Yes, I know. The soap opera there. Well, he already fell in love with a human. She's just gone now. So you're competing with a lost woman. So any other points? So then we are to be continued to next week, to the next episode of Family of Blood. So any other points that I missed here that you guys want to bring up? Okay, so this was to be continued, folks. We're going to pick this up where we leave off here at the next episode. So before we do that, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who. And today we're thanking by name Corey L., Jerry S., Armand P., Teresa C., and Susan B. Through their generous donations at sqpn.com/give, they make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows we do at SQPN. And if you'd like to join them, you can visit sqpn.com/give. So tell us what you thought of this first part of the 10th Doctor story, Human Nature. You can let us know by going to sqpn.com and leaving a comment there, or going to the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page and leave a comment there. Leave some feedback, or send us an email. Leave us an email at doctorwho@sqpn.com. And we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing Family of Blood, the second part of this two-parter. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thanks, Tom.
And Father Corey Stika, thank you as well.
Well, thank you, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, permission to give Latimer a beating, sir.
Right. This is going to be fun.